everyone. It's an absolute delight to be here, and I'd really like to thank both Ray's partners and Vietcetera for the invitation to join you today, and also extend that thank you to the Australian Government for their support, as well as the work that they have been doing over many years now in advancing the dialogue and action on how we can use capital as a force for good. I'm going to have to ad-lib somewhat here because Sarah did mention a few of the things that I have in my presentation. So please bear with me if you feel as though I'm sort of just juggling around a little bit. But what I wanted to do in the next 15 minutes with you is really just to lay out what we see as the evolution in ESG. An evolution that's being driven by increasingly discerning investors. Investors that are no longer satisfied with just looking at ESG as a way just simply to mitigate risk. They're looking to work how they can actually use their capital towards addressing problems that we face, both environmental and social across the world, that are affecting our planet and our communities, both locally and globally. The urgency of these challenges is reinforced every day as we look around ourselves. In my home country of Australia, while we're affectionately known for our unique landscape and our marsupials such as the kangaroo, the koala or an elusive platypus, we are seeing firsthand the damage that environmental neglect causes. Despite our rich biodiversity, we are a global deforestation hotspot, and floods and fires fueled by the impacts of global warming, have become a near constant in our landscapes. We also have lost more mammal species than any other continent. These are facts that I am not proud of as an Australian, but they are facts that we must all recognise and we must all work towards looking at solutions towards. Vietnam too is acutely vulnerable to climate change. Rising sea levels threaten the livelihoods of millions in the Mekong Delta, one of Southeast Asia's most vital agricultural regions. Urban centres such as Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi face mounting risks of climate from extreme heat and flooding. These environmental challenges are unfolding alongside rapid economic development, and which, while lifting millions out of poverty, have introduced new social pressures and highlighted the urgent need for inclusive, sustainable growth. Similarly, social inequities are visible across the world. While global GDP has grown substantially, nearly over the last 4 decades, the benefits have not been evenly shared. Rising inequality within and between nations and political polarisation that Mimi mentioned in her opening remarks are now significant risks, not only to the economic resilience of nations around the world, but to the progress that we're making towards climate action and towards inclusive growth. This shift in the investment landscape is not, however, a new trend. It is an evolution that's been building since the late 1990s, when investors consciously around the world began asking the question of whether it was possible to mitigate ESG risks while achieving both financial returns and meaningfully positive impact. For over 2 decades, my work has been centred around helping investors answer that exact question. The answer, as we know it today, is a resounding yes. But to understand where ESG is headed, we need to understand first where it began. So the term ESG investing, or what might more commonly be known as ESG integration, first entered the investment lexicon in the early 2000s. And as I'm sure many of you know in the room today and appreciate, it refers to the practice of incorporating environmental, social, governance, ESG factors into your investment analysis and decision-making, with the aim of approving risk-adjusted returns. ESG integration is a risk management tool, as traditionally known. Approximately 1/3 of fund managers and assets under management around the world are guided by an ESG integration mandate. Yet despite its prominence and seemingly straightforward definition, ESG integration is anything but uniform in practice. It's anything, as I say, anything but uniform in practice. Investors and fund managers apply vastly different methodologies, relying on a combination of proprietary methodologies in-house or third-party data providers such as Morningstar Sustainalytics, S&P Global or Ethos ESG. The results? Vast inconsistencies, causing extreme difficulty for investors to actually navigate what they can invest in and whether they're investing in is going to actually be delivering positive social and environmental outcomes. Let's take for an example the example on the board here or on the slides and consider the ESG scores of two companies. ESG scores being the primary, I suppose, focus and tool that many ESG analysts use to make their investment decisions. Up here I have an example of two companies, one Helios Limited, a healthcare services provider, and Lockheed Martin, an aerospace and defence contractor. Defence being an industry that many investors do not want to take part in, do not want to have exposure in their portfolio to, whereas healthcare being something that we see as critical and important for our capital to be directed towards. Yet the ESG scores here show that the results vary significantly between data providers. An investor basing their investment strategy solely on ESG scores would arrive at markedly different conclusions depending on the data that they provide. For example, if you used the data on the very far right of the slide, which is Sustainalytics data, you would actually invest in your defence contractor versus investing in your healthcare. If your investor, or in my case, if my client is saying to me, I don't want to invest in defence, and I was just using this score as a mechanism to make my investment selection, I would be misdirected in that decision. The inconsistency of how ESG is viewed and the methodologies that is used results from it having been developed as a lens which looks at just single materiality. It focuses solely on how ESG issues affect a company's financial performance. Under an approach of single materiality, a company can earn a really high ESG score by having strong policies, good disclosures, and low ESG-related risks, even if its products or operations or services contribute to negative environmental or social outcomes. The key that we need to do today and going forward is to move to double materiality, considering how a company's activities affect people and planet. When we move to double materiality, ESG begins to align more closely with the outcomes that many investors are truly seeking, real-world environmental and social outcomes. It is this shift from a narrow focus on managing for ESG risks to seeking in parallel to understand and contribute to environmental and social outcomes that lies at the heart of the ongoing evolution of ESG. Investors are no longer asking only, are the ESG risks of the investment appropriately accounted for? They are asking, what kind of world is my capital building? As this mindset takes hold, a new generation of investors is seeking to align capital with purpose, and new frameworks are emerging to enable an impact lens to be applied across investment portfolios using a range of impact strategies. From investment screening to active stewardship and engagement, strategies that many of you might be familiar with as you look at constructing investment portfolios, to targeting impact investments and catalytic capital. Those investments are ones that are intentionally seeking measurable social and environmental outcomes alongside financial return. It is frameworks like those that have been developed by the Impact Management Project, now under the banner of Impact Frontiers, that have emerged to provide clarity and a shared language to guide this shift from ESG for risk management to ESG for impact. At the heart of the Impact Management Project is what we call the impact spectrum, which is here on the slide in front of you. The impact spectrum defines 5 what we call impact classes to help investors understand the impact of their investments. Investments can either cause harm, avoid harm, benefit stakeholders, contribute to solutions, or catalyse and contribute solutions. These classes are really helpful to allow investors to clarify the intention and the effect of their capital allocations. It gives us a common language to talk between investee and investors. It gives us a common language to talk within the market. And it allows investors to determine where they want to play with their capital allocation. Do they want to avoid harm by reducing external externalities or negative externalities? Do they want to actively benefit stakeholders by participating in activities that benefit people and planet, like investing in healthcare? Or do they want to scale innovations that deliver measurable social and environmental outcomes? What we have now become commonly known as impact investments, a term which was coined in 2007. It is by adopting the double materiality, or what we sometimes call as an impact lens alongside ESG risk, that investment portfolios can be constructed to not only reflect investors' financial goals and their risk tolerance, but also their values and their desired contribution to real-world outcomes, to build the world that we want our future generations to inherit. Yet, once we've decided that we want to allocate our capital for positive outcomes, the obvious question becomes, where is capital most needed? To answer this question, we can turn to models like the donut economics, developed by Oxford economist Dr. Kate Raworth. This framework imagines a safe and just space for humanity, a space bounded by 2 limits, an environmental ceiling and a set of social foundations. The environmental ceiling is defined by 9 planetary boundaries, beyond which lie unacceptable environmental degradation and the risk of irreversible tipping points. At the same time, the model identifies 12 dimensions of a social foundation, derived from internationally recognised minimum standards embedded in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and that ensure every person can live with dignity and opportunity. The challenge before us is, however, stark. Humanity, as shown on the right-hand side of this slide, currently is overshooting 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. These include climate change, as evidenced by rising temperatures and more frequent extreme weather events around the world, biodiversity loss with accelerating extinction rates, land use change, which is eroding our natural habitats, freshwater use, where over-extraction is leading to growing scarcity, and resource use, where consumption is far outpacing what our Earth can regenerate. At the same time, social deprivation persists. The world is currently on track to achieve just 17% of the 169 targets underlying the 17 SDGs, a sobering indicator that billions of people still live without access to basics such as food, water, education, healthcare and housing. It is a clear call to action, and one that reminds us of the urgency of directing capital towards the solutions that are most needed. As I read this and listen to this, I realise it's a little bit of a sobering start to a Tuesday morning. But there is definitely hope, and this is the hope that my work has been looking at over the last 20 years. As we work with, in my case, primarily family offices and trust and foundations, to mobilise capital for a better tomorrow, to mobilise capital in a way that will address the social and the environmental challenges that I just spoke of. Let me share one example, and as Sarah gave some highlights for in her opening address as well, the Australian government has an innovative and catalytic fund called the Australian Development Investments, or ADI Fund, of which I sit on the investment committee. I'm going to try not to repeat the facts that Sarah provided you, but to actually try and bring to life a little bit of how we use the capital in this fund to crowd in private capital. There's very much a recognition that public capital, or that from governments, is insufficient. The capital from trust or foundations or philanthropic capital around the world is also insufficient to address the challenges that we face environmentally and socially. So ADI was created in 2020 as a pilot under something called the Emerging Market Impact Investment Funds. And following a review, it was expanded in 2023 to a 250 million Aussie facility. In short, ADI exists to mobilise private capital towards two of Indo-Pacific's most urgent and underfunded priorities: climate action and gender equality. By supporting the clean energy transition and unlocking capital for small and medium enterprises, especially those which are led by women or delivering climate solutions, ADI aims to drive inclusive and sustainable growth across the region. Let's take a closer look at the why of ADI. So why SMEs? SMEs account for 70% of employment and 40% of GDP across the Indo-Pacific. Here in Vietnam, SMEs make up 98% of businesses, contribute 40% of GDP, and employ more than half of the country's workforce. Yet despite their invaluable contribution to economic resilience, SMEs face persistent barriers to affordable finance. Why women? Women-led businesses are consistently overlooked for financing globally, and even more so here in the Indo-Pacific. ADI applies a gender lens across its investments to support inclusive entrepreneurship and economic empowerment. Why climate? Energy demand in the Indo-Pacific is expected to double by 2050 as countries seek cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable energy. Yet despite making up 9% of the world's population, 6% of GDP, and 5% of energy demand, the region attracts just 2% of global energy investment, or global clean energy investment, I should say. Yet to meet the climate and energy goals of the region, including Vietnam's net zero commitment, investment must increase fivefold, requiring around 190 billion by 2030. ADI is a small part of closing this gap, but a really important part of closing the gap given the importance of SMEs in solving and in the solutions. So how does ADI actually do this? ADI was established as a fund of funds. It is not about a group of foreigners coming into the room, and it sounds ironic when I'm standing here, coming into a room and saying this is the way that it should be done. This is the way money should flow. This is the types of projects money should flow to. It's about actually building support for the local capital markets. It's about supporting local fund managers and local financiers to bring their capital to bear on the environmental and social challenges that we face. So ADI uses a fund-of-fund model, investing through local private equity, venture capital and debt funds to help women-led and climate-focused SMEs access the early-stage growth capital that is critical to their sustainability and survival and critical to scaling the solutions that are needed. It not only strengthens businesses, but helps to build, as I said, the local capital markets by getting behind the fund managers. It strengthens the investment pipeline. It ensures robust impact management to enable investors to understand where the environmental and impact outcomes are that they are making. And it strategically anchors funds by providing first loss or concessional capital to help crowd in a diverse mix of co-investors. It is this crowding in of private capital, the pool of capital that is the largest in the world, beyond that which governments can supply, beyond that which can be provided from philanthropic funders, that is absolutely essential to mobilise. And it is in that mobilisation of private capital that ADI's real power lies. Its ability to take on greater risk, offer more flexible terms, or accept below market returns to unlock private investment that is most needed. And it does this by using a blended finance structure. I was going to go on to talk about a little bit about what ADI has achieved, but Sarah actually covered that in her opening comments. She talked about the high growth companies that ADI has supported through the seven fund managers that we have supported. Some of those, AVV, obviously working here in Vietnam, but also many others which are working and doing things here in Vietnam as well. She also spoke about the leverage that the public capital has been provided, which is now sitting at nearly 6 times. So what I want to do is just backtrack a little bit and actually talk a little bit more about the blended finance approach that we use to try and bring that to life to people here in the room. And I apologise, this is where I start to diverge from my notes. So ADI, as I said, was actually established to provide that catalytic capital. When I'm working with my clients, which as I said are family offices, trust foundations, and also wealth advisors in Australia, to actually mobilise their investment portfolios into opportunities here in Vietnam or across the Indo-Pacific, it's a deep, long conversation. It's a conversation where they need to actually understand the risk, not only of the investment, but of the region. They have to also understand what impact is going to be achieved by that investment as well. It is those two things which actually enable their capital to be mobilised. They're wanting to achieve financial return with their capital. First and foremost, they want to protect their capital. And they're wanting their capital to be directed to solving and providing solutions for environmental and social challenges. Yet, many of the risks in the region are actually unknown to them. Many of them would be investing in the region for the first time. And so this is the really important part that ADI provides by actually getting behind local fund managers here in Vietnam and across Indonesia and the Philippines and Singapore that are working in the region to actually start to de-risk these investments so that those private investors can start to crowd in their capital. So ADI does a number of things. It dives deeply into the investments. It shares its due diligence with private investors so that they can come up the curve to know what the investments are, opportunities are. It shares the pipeline to be able to, I suppose, explain what the market opportunities are, to understand where one opportunity is versus another opportunity, to give points of comparison across that pipeline. But most importantly, what it does is it leads as an investor. It will put its money in first, demonstrating a level of confidence in these local fund managers. It may actually put its money in as a high-risk tranche, de-risking the opportunity for that private capital to flow. And is it that approach that blends the public capital with the private capital that is absolutely essential to driving and mobilising the capital that is needed to address the challenges that we face. I spent a lot of time working in India early in my time of impact investing, and so I've been in the sector since 2004 now and predate the term of impact investing. But one of the key things we saw there as the market actually grew in India was that absolute need for collaboration between different types of investors, for investors to actually understand where their risk appetite is, to understand where they want to invest their capital, and to work collaboratively with others with similar mindsets, but also with mindsets that can work in a way that blends that capital together. So in summary, ADI is a powerful example of how strategically deployed concessional capital combined with strong impact discipline can support the energy transition. It empowers women entrepreneurs and scales businesses driving low-carbon economy and an inclusive future. It exemplifies how blending of public and private capital can enable the flow of capital to solutions addressing social and environmental challenges. In summary, the evolution of ESG reflects a deeper reimagining of capital. From managing risks to catalysing solutions, investors today are asking more of their portfolios and more of themselves. This is the challenge I put to all in the room today. For the challenges that we face, climate, inequality and social division, are urgent, complex and interconnected, but they are not insurmountable. With intentionality, collaboration and courage, we can harness capital not just as a financial tool, but as a force for good.
Thank you.